This is the Build Wealth Canada podcast, episode number 37.
Welcome to the Build Wealth Canada podcast, where it's all about becoming debt-free, accelerating your wealth, and taking control of your money. Now, here's your host, Cornell Schreiber.
Hey, it's Cornell and welcome to the Build Wealth Canada show. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the world of real estate, and we're going to approach it from two different sides. So first, we'll talk about real estate as an investment. So this is more if you're ever thought of investing in a property and renting it out. Now, if you've listened to past episodes of the show, then you know that it can actually be really hard to get the numbers to work when buying a home and trying to rent it out as an investment. And so today's expert is going to share some strategies with us that she uses to actually successfully invest and make the numbers work despite the high prices of real estate that we've been seeing. Next, we'll shift focus a bit and talk all about the different home buying tips and expensive mistakes that you can avoid when buying a home for yourself. And even if you've bought a home in the past, I still recommend that you tune in as the real estate market has likely changed since the last time you bought a home. And today's guest shares some up-to-date money saving tips and ways to protect yourself when you're buying a home, whether it's for personal use or whether it's as an investment. Today, I'm excited to welcome our sponsor, Paytm, which is a free app that helps you manage all your bills in one place. Now, when I first heard of them, I thought, but I can already do that with my bank, so what's the big deal? Well, with Paytm, they basically pay you to pay your bills. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you get up to 3% cash back on bills that you pay through their app. And you can even get as high as 5% cash back on certain purchases. Now, there's no bank in Canada that is giving out that much when you pay your bills. Usually you get nothing when you pay your bills through the bank. What's also unique is that Paytm lets you pay bills that don't normally accept credit cards. Now, this is a big deal for me because while you may have a great credit card, you typically can't use it to pay for things like property tax and utilities. And if you're a student or have kids in college or university, you typically can't use your credit cards to pay the tuition and get the credit card reward points or, cash back on those credit cards because those places just don't accept credit cards. So I've been getting 0% cash back on bills for years, and with Paytm, you can actually get up to 3% cash back on those bills too. And since these are larger bills that you're paying all the time, probably forever if we're talking about paying utilities and property taxes, the free money that you get through the cash back really starts to add up. So basically with the Paytm app, you're getting the ability to manage all your bill payments in one place. You're getting reminders when those bills are due, and you get cash back on those bills, even on bills that typically don't give you any rewards for when you pay them. So as a sponsor of this show, Paytm is giving away $10 cash back to all Build Wealth Canada listeners when they make their first bill payment. So to get that, just download the Paytm app from the Apple App Store or Google Play and just use the promo code BUILDWEALTH, all lowercase, all one word, when paying your first bill. And when you do that, you'll instantly get $10 cash back on that bill. So the promo code again is BUILDWEALTH, all lowercase and no spaces to get the $10 cash back for free. You can also go to paytm.ca and download the app from there, whether you're an Apple or Android user. All right, so a big thank you to Paytm for supporting Build Wealth Canada. And now let's get on to the show. All right, Limor, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so it's great to have you here. And really just to kick things off for anyone that hasn't really heard of you yet, can you give us a little bit more info about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a self-proclaimed money nerd, as I know you are as well. I've always been really fascinated with money. And when I graduated from university, I went right into the banking industry where I spent 10 years working for some of Canada's largest banks, essentially promoting and marketing financial products. So it really gave me a good sense of how banks make money, but also how customers make mistakes. And then about 4.5 years ago, I started getting really heavily involved in real estate investing, reading lots of books and getting super involved. And once I got started with real estate, I was addicted pretty quickly. And with my investments there, while I really didn't have any plans to leave the corporate world, within 2.5 years, I was able to leave my corporate job. And then since then, have really been focusing on empowering people to be what I call financially fabulous. Over on my website, limor.money, I put out content there and essentially helping people to understand the basics of personal finance as well as real estate investing. So I have the privilege of teaching investment and real estate investing in 3-day seminars across Canada.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because I would think that being in the banking industry, you would have you would have been, you're always surrounded by basically, different types of investing, right? Like you're probably surrounded by, mutual funds all the time and things like that. So how did you how did that light bulb go off in your head about, hey, maybe I should get into real estate investing when you're kind of surrounded in this other world, basically?
Yeah, and I mean, it was very humbling when I first started learning about real estate because I thought I knew a lot about money. So, really funny, I started reading a whole bunch of books about real estate. The one that we've all read is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I found myself in a 3-day seminar where basically I sat in the front row with my jaw on the ground for the entire 3 days, being like, holy crap, like, how come no one has ever taught this to me?
Hmm.
So, while I thought I knew a lot about different investments, and I definitely do in some capacity, I wasn't exposed to real estate, and the banking industry doesn't necessarily teach us about investing opportunities in the real estate world.
Hmm. Gotcha. So did you just kind of get intrigued by it, and then you kind of started going down the rabbit hole, and then reading more and more and more, and then eventually you're like, oh, I got to get into this. Is that kind of what
Yeah,
happened? Yeah.
that's a really big part of it. But there was also motivation for me. I really wanted to generate passive income.
Hmm.
We're all working pretty hard, and I was just kind of thinking like, how do I have more choices in my life, whether that's career wise or with a family. I was working corporate, lots of hours, round the clock, and while I was loving what I was doing, I was like, do I always want to work these kinds of crazy hours? And I thought generating passive income would give me a lot more options for my future.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that kind of really intrigued me about your bio is that you did say that in 2.5 years basically you were able to leave the corporate world, and then basically just through investing in real estate you were able to pay for your life, pay for your expenses. So you're able to make kind of a full transition from a regular corporate job to just working on real estate, full time in just 2.5 years, which is obviously really, really impressive. How did you pull this off? I'm really intrigued about this because I remember, when I used to be really, really into real estate, like we still own a rental property today. And I remember just, on my spreadsheets doing the math and saying, okay, if we, like in our current market, if I start investing in it, I mean, at the end of the day, we might get like $100 positive, cash flow a month per door, right? Like that's all that it was, kind of, best case scenario. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, how can you possibly, the property is appreciating, so you're making kind of a bulk of your money that way. You're leveraged, obviously, so you're making, you're that's kind of where the nice gains are coming from. But from a cash flow perspective, it's a relatively small amount, especially compared to like a regular, full-time corporate job. So, I mean, how did you make it work? I'm ridiculously curious.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a really good question. And let me start off by saying that when I first started my journey in real estate and I attended that seminar, I was like, all these strategies that we're learning were far more advanced than just buy a single family home, put a tenant in, and hope that they pay the rent on time. And that's kind of where you get in this scenario where you're like, okay, maybe it cash flows $100 a month.
Right.
But when you get into far more advanced strategies, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today, things are really different. So when I started, I actually spent $20,000 on real estate investing classes, and I've spent a lot more than that now at this point, really working with mentors in the industry. So I think the first part is that I got a proper education about how to invest in real estate properly. I wasn't kind of figuring out as I go. I wasn't, as I like to call it, at the school of hard knocks. And through the classes and the education that I took, I got a lot of systems and templates, and I got introduced to a lot of professionals who are savvy and working with investors that really opened a lot of doors for me. Also, when it came to investing, even from very early on, I wasn't necessarily always using my own money. So, typically when you think about you're going to buy a rental property, you're like, okay, how much money do I have saved up? Can I put that as a down payment? And then if you're cash flowing 100 or 2 or whatever it is a month, you're kind of maxed out.
Right.
But when it comes to leveraging other people, working with lots of different joint venture partners, I am not limited by the amount of money that I've saved in my account or how many mortgages I'm going to qualify for. So that allowed me to exponentially grow my portfolio a lot faster than if I was trying to save money from my corporate job and then put that into the down payment. And then, a combination of the variety of strategies and all of the properties and the investing that I do is actually inside of corporations that I have set up, which also gives me a benefit of, paying lower taxes. So kind of all of those pieces put together is how things started to snowball in a positive way really quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, so yeah, what you're describing was basically what I was, when I was doing all the analysis. That's pretty much what it was okay, single family home. I'm able to, let's say take this much equity out of my house to help with, turning a new property into a rental property, you know, that kind of a thing. And yeah, I felt like, yeah, I'm doing single family. I'm too scared to go multi-unit. So, because it's, you know, there at that point, you know, you're dealing with, you know, 7-figure sums generally, right? So it's, so I remember for me, I was like, oh, this is terrifying. So that was the pickle I found myself in, because I'm like, okay, like we have one rental. And I was like, okay, I want to buy more, but okay, if it's really hard to make to actually make it cash flow positive. And even if, especially when you're kind of operating on a smaller scale where you're just doing single family homes, and then it's like, okay, so the solution is go multi-unit, like, or, you know, or student housing, things like that. And then it's like, but now you're not dealing with small money and more, well, small. And by small, I mean like, you know, only a few $100,000, which is still not small, right? But then it's like, oh, now I have to throw in like $1 million, and that's terrifying for a lot of people. So
for sure. And also when you're doing it that way, where you've got a single family home, I mean, you have one massive maintenance that you weren't expecting.
Oh,
you know, something dies, the roof, there's an issue, like all of a sudden it wipes out all of your cash flow for like the entire year. And then you're sort of hoping and praying that the property appreciates. Like no investment on your side or mine should ever be about like hoping and praying that you make money.
Yeah. And I find the thing that too, because I used to read about this a ton, and I remember one thing that really got me, I was like thinking like, oh, multi-unit would be so nice, was the whole kind of vacancy rate issue, right? Where if you own a single family home, it's just one tenant. So if they decide to leave, all of a sudden your vacancy rate is 100%. So you're either 0 or 100% in terms of how vacant your property is, you know, compared to like an apartment building, right? Where it's like, okay, a tenant leaves. So yeah, you've got a bit of a vacancy rate now for a temporary time, but it's not 100% vacancy, right? It might be, you know, it's obviously odd. So you can kind of, from a cash flow perspective, it's much more stable, I think, than just a single family where it's kind of like all or nothing. But then that's the thing, right? Then it's like, are you willing to throw in a few million? And where do you get this few million? And
there you go. Good question,
so that's where your more advanced strategies come in. So that makes sense how you're able to kind of do it that way. And I guess kudos to your salesmanship skills, because I mean, if you're able to get kind of, if you're just kind of getting started and you're already able to get people to invest their money and buy properties with them, I mean, that's you must be quite the marketer and salesperson, I think, too.
Well, I mean, okay, obviously there's an element of that, but I think it's also really important to note that I was working with mentors and instructors in the industry who have many, many years of experience, massive portfolios, and they were helping me every single step of the way. So I had them reviewing the deals, helping me on the calls, you know, and when you've got that kind of support, it makes things go a lot faster. Also, when I'm using other people's money, which is most of the time, I'm even more cautious than my own money, because you know, this is somebody's really important investment, and I'm enabling them to invest in real estate and get them stronger returns and more likely certain returns. But I take that very, very seriously.
And I imagine things start snowballing too, right? Like once you pull off a few successful deals, either by yourself or with other people, then now you've got a portfolio. When you're talking to a potential investor, you can show them, okay, here's what I did with the last 3 properties I did. You know, now you can jump in and do something. We're going to do something, the same thing with this next one. And then it's a much more easier thing, as opposed to just, hey, I'm decided to get into real estate. Can I have some money?
Hey, I have no idea what I'm doing. Can I spend your money and maybe not get it back to you? No,
So I get, but it's So I'm like, how did you start off? Because that's always the hardest part. But the whole, like the mentor and the connection, the mentoring connections, that makes total sense. Okay, no, that's awesome. So I mean, we're gonna talk. I know one of the things we're gonna talk a lot about today is not just real estate investing per se, but also if you're looking to just buy a home for your own personal use, just, you know, like a primary residence. So, you know, definitely we'll jump to that in a moment. But before getting into that, I still want to pick your brain about one more investing thing, because like I said, I'm kind of a nerd about this stuff.
That's what I'm here for.
So in kind of when I was reading your bio before, you mentioned that you basically use all these different real estate investing strategies to be able to pull this off and to actually make it work. So some of the ones that I remember, you know, seeing is, you know, the rent to own, the hard money lending, RSP mortgages, wholesale, pre-foreclosures, flipping. So those were kind of the ones that I saw you mentioned. Can you give us a little bit of an overview about some of the main ones that you use, that, you know, the main ones that you like? Kind of what are they? What are the pros and cons of them? You know, because to me, I find them very intriguing, because it's like I said, I found it's really hard to make it work with just kind of the basic traditional, you know, put some money down for the down payment, get a single family home and rent it. It's so much tougher to do that. So how did you do it with kind of these advanced strategies?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it makes sense. I'll do a little bit of an explanation on two of them, and feel free to ask questions because I know they're pretty new to you and probably some of the listeners as well. The first one that I'm going to talk about is rent to owns, and the second one I'm going to talk about is RSP mortgages. So let's start over with rent to own. So basically, what I'm doing in this scenario is I start with a family whose credit is slightly bruised. So most people have no idea how to manage their credit. Maybe they've spent a little bit too much on their credit cards, or they haven't paid their cell phone bills because they were mad at their provider, or, they've done a couple of things. It doesn't necessarily make them horrible with their finances or horrible people, but their credit's not necessarily in great shape to be able to qualify for a mortgage. And essentially, they have to qualify for the program, but once I have this family that I'm going to be working with, I have them choose the house that they would like to own in the future. What I have them do is put down or provide a deposit that's called an option or an option consideration, which is typically in the range of 3 to 4% of the fair market value. So it's, a decent investment on their part. And then, like I said, they choose the house and I will buy it with investor money. Have the investor qualify for the mortgage, and then they move into the property. And so, as a result of that, they end up paying a slightly higher rent because they have the right or the privilege to live in a house right now that they are going to own in the future. So, in many instances, it's a family, they want to be in a certain school district. They're not looking to move their family around. So, they have the privilege now to live in this house that they are going to own in the future. They're allowed to paint it, which is very different to a straight up rental where you basically can't even hammer any nails in the walls. I encourage them to force appreciate the property, and basically they take care of the maintenance. So up front, we're also going to agree on the future purchase price, and typically the rent to own program is roughly 3 years because that's how long it takes typically to repair someone's credit. It can be 2, it can be 4, really just depending on their current situation. And so essentially throughout that duration of time with paying a slightly higher rent, I'm saving part of the rent that I'm going to give back to them together with that initial option amount so that when they complete the program, call it in 3 years' time, when I give them back their option amount and I give them that little bit of rent that I've saved for them every single month, they've got enough for the down payment. So they have their down payment completely taken care of. And throughout the 3-year term, their main responsibility is to work with a credit specialist who I connect them with, to help them to fix their credit. And usually it's a pretty straight, easy list of, do's and don'ts. And then they also take care of the property. So for me as an investor, the maintenance is actually pretty low. So let me just pause right there because it's kind of giving you a little bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And so that you're not actually dealing with the property management side of it, which sounds fantastic.
Yeah, so they're responsible for that. And so actually the property management side, for the ones that I have in Ontario, I will go out probably once every 3 months in the first year, probably once every 6 months in the second and third year. And it's basically like me on a Saturday afternoon sitting at the kitchen table, we'll bring some baked goods and we're talking about family and life. And it's really about kind of helping them because this family, would never have been able to qualify for a mortgage. They'd never be in a situation where they could pay off, the mortgage in 25 years and be able to retire. And so it makes it a lot more of an investment in the family. But for me as an investor, I'm benefiting in a couple of ways. One, they're paying the rent every single month and it's a bit of a higher rent. So I end up having stronger cash flow. Also, I'm not going to have those maintenance costs because they're responsible for that. And, by the rent covering the mortgage, I'm getting sort of pay down on the mortgage itself. But we're also predetermining upfront what the appreciation rate is going to be and what they're going to buy it out for in the 3-year time frame.
So what happens if? Oh, and I should clarify too. When I said all the property management thing you have to worry about. Well, I know probably like with property management, you just have to worry about the rent and make sure that you get it and all that kind of stuff. But I'm also referring to kind of the maintenance, right? The kind of
Yeah. I mean, it's
where you're not there.
2017. They just pay me online. Like nobody collects checks anymore.
right. But yeah, but like chasing someone down or whatever, like there's still that. But if you found the right tenant, you're not doing that. But yeah, like the main thing is, you don't have to go and fix the furnace or something you're saying because that they're responsible for that. Okay.
Just a clarified point, when they put in that initial option or the deposit, essentially, they're putting in, if we're talking about a substantial property that's maybe $300 to $400,000, like they're putting in a good $15,000 that they only get back if they buy the house in the future. So they are
Oh, okay.
very, very invested in this property and invested that this is also their financial future. So, I like to say if they put in a $15,000 deposit, they have 15,000 reasons why they're going to pay the rent on time every single month and take care of the property.
Gotcha. So obviously you're making money off the rent. You're getting some better cash flow than you normally could by doing just more of a traditional rental kind of agreement. And then on the sale of the property, do you make money on that side as well? How does that work?
Yeah, so there's three ways that you make money. One, like you said, is the increased cash flow because they're paying slightly higher rent. So this is not like $100 a month like your example before. I would say they're quite a bit higher than that from a cash flow perspective. Also, you've got the equity that's building when they pay down your mortgage, and then you're also determining upfront what the appreciation rate is going to be. And so when I'm selling the property in 3 years' time, I'm selling it for more than I bought it. So when I work on these programs and design it, I usually use an appreciation rate that is lower than what's happening in the marketplace so that it gives the tenant buyers, that's what they're called, the people who are tenants now and buyers in the future, it gives them the opportunity to lock in now at a little bit of a lower rate than what we might see in the future. So, we try to have a win-win there. Obviously, you can't always guarantee that the market's going to appreciate, but, especially with the kind of crazy appreciation rates in double digits that we've seen over the last few years. I mean, I use a much lower appreciation rate than that, but, there are in fact times where it may not appreciate as high. And at that point, we kind of get together at the end of the program and say, have they done their part? And what can I do to make the concession? So I actually have one in Calgary that just finished up the 3-year term this summer. And, we've had a dip there. So we ended up lowering the price. But the returns for myself and the investor are still really significant and pretty decent.
And then what if it's the reverse? What if a property appreciated a lot more than you previously hoped? I mean, are you then kind of losing out because they've already, you have a contractual obligation to sell it to them at a much lower price?
Yeah, I mean, I've had that scenario happen quite a few times. And I would say, like, I mean, contractually, I've said, you get 4% appreciation. If the market's done 24%, unless I come with a win-win scenario, I will sell it to them so they get the extra equity. But, I've had some instances where we basically said, okay, let's increase the purchase price by X amount of dollars. And the amount that we're increasing it by, let's split it 60-40, or let's split it 70-30, where they're still getting the majority of the benefit.
Okay.
At the end of the day, I mean, it is a gamble in the sense that, like, I don't know that the market's going to appreciate that, but I'm really doing this twofold. Like, I want to make sure that my investments are growing at a significant rate, but I'm also really helping a family, which I think is a pretty nice way to make money and make a difference in somebody else's life at the same time.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So, I mean, have people actually agreed to it? I mean, contractually, they're able to buy it at a much lower price, but it's appreciated, let's say, way, way more than what kind of either of you guys thought it would. And you approach them about that. I mean, do people actually say, okay, fine, you can have some of that? Or do they say no, because this is what our contract is? Too bad, basically, right? Like how
Yeah, so actually the response has been really favorable because part of the way that I've done it, I've said, okay, if we're increasing the property, let's just say by $40,000, the sale price going up, they're going to get maybe 30,000 and I'm going to get 10. And of the 30,000, the way that's been structured, I've been able to give them cash back at closing when they buy the property, so that they may end up with a higher amount that they can put towards their down payment, or they end up with cash that they can use to either renovate for their families, for their lives, and they're supremely grateful. But in all those instances, I'm like, here's the option. I'm going to honor the price that I said I was going to sell it to you at. I'm still making a lot of money in the process, and if we can all win together, people are generally excited about that opportunity.
That makes sense. And I guess the incentive for them too is that if they just, they can just do it through you, that's an easier process than saying, okay, because I guess the alternative is if they can somehow, I'm just trying to think, because I mean, it's easier to just kind of do it through you directly than for them to try to, actually, I don't know. I'm just trying to
Yeah,
Kind of
so
makes sense
really
then.
they
Yeah.
have the option to buy the property from me at the price, and
Yeah.
it's at a lower price typically than the fair market value.
Mhm.
And that's because I've invested in them and they've invested in being part of the rent to own
Right.
program.
Okay. Sounds good.
Hmm.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of it kind of from different angles and stuff.
Yeah,
Like
no,
kind of the worst case scenario for you, where they're like, like, because we've had some ridiculous growth over the past while, right? So just if that happens and then that wasn't factored into your model, kind of how you can kind of salvage that and still kind of get the gains and such. But no,
yeah,
no
for
that
sure.
but no that makes sense. It's and so I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, on the rent to own program, I mean, I'm making double digit returns every year throughout the program. So, there comes a point where it's like, I don't want to be greedy. I'm helping a family and I'm making money. Like, it's already a fantastic win-win for everybody.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I guess because I'm thinking like, oh, opportunity cost, but like that's why
I
I'm
like the way you think, my friend.
that's why I'm so hung up on it. I'm like, wait a minute, but how can you think like how can you I guess that's why I'm like stumbling here, because I'm trying to think of how could the deal be structured to make it that you're able to take advantage of the appreciation if it's much more than what you thought. But like you said, if you're making double digit growth anyway, they're happy, you're happy. Also, if they're happy with the experience, they could probably maybe refer you to some other people, and
That
you can.
is
So,
exactly the point.
so it's
And
like you're not gonna nickel and dime over kind of these. Yeah, basically, yeah, you stick true to your contract. They might get a nice big win, but then they're more likely to give you referrals and things of that nature. And it's not like you're losing money either, so it's
nope,
everyone's happy.
not even close. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So I have this mind where like I'm always like, how can this be optimized? Because that sounds like a big risk, right? Especially with the property values the way they've been going.
Yeah, but I don't
Yeah.
think that it's a big risk in the sense that like I'm still making a lot of money.
Yeah.
If the risk is like I can make an even bigger pile of money.
Yeah.
there's
Yeah. And
some
that's
point where
just the
I'm
way my brain works, right? Like when I say risk, I'm like, I'm talking opportunity cost. So it's just like extra profitability, not risk as in, oh, you're actually going to lose money because you're making
Yeah.
money regardless. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. All
So
right.
that's one of the strategies that I do. And like I
Good
said
stuff.
before, when I am working with other investors, other people who are putting in the deposit, other people who are qualifying for the mortgage, there's no limit on how many of these I can do, right? It's not
Right.
about me trying to save my own money and trying to qualify for more mortgages.
Yeah.
So
No,
that's a
that
one
makes total
strategy.
sense. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the other one that I was going to tell you a little bit about is RSP mortgages. And this is something that when I first learned about it, I was like, holy crap, like, how is this possible? So essentially, I mean, everybody knows when you have RSPs and you invest them, you have options like GICs, you've got stocks, you've got mutual funds, you've got a bunch of different options. But what most people don't know is that actually inside of your RSPs, in a self-directed account, you can actually invest in private mortgages. Now, this is something that the big five banks do not allow you to do. They used to, and I can only speculate to say that they don't allow you to do anymore because you're the one who's actually making a lot of money, but that's totally my speculation. So
That's usually how it works, though. Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
the
industry long enough.
they're not earning, their 2.5% to 3% mutual fund fee if you do that, right? So
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
So, when you transfer your money to financial institutions such as Community Trust or Olympia Trust is a really big one in Western Canada, you actually have the ability to be a one-to-one lender where you are essentially lending your RSP money to a property or to like a borrower to be on property, and you are essentially the mortgage holder. So you become registered on title and they pay you like the same way they pay their mortgage payment straight into your RSP every single month. So when I log into one of those banks, which I use, essentially the same way you would see when you log into your online banking and you may see like the stock symbol or whatever you're invested in, I actually see the addresses of the properties that I invest my money in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the cool thing with this is that RSPs generate much stronger returns. The range, I would say, is anywhere from probably 6 to 18%, depending on if you're in a first mortgage or a second mortgage. And typically, they're short term. So when you loan RSP money, and you can actually do this with any registered account, but RSPs is the most popular one, is they're typically 1 year. So they're sort of short term investments. And when you lend money, you really want to start with like, how am I going to get it back as kind of the most important element. So maybe I could give you an example to kind of try to bring this to
Sure,
light,
sure.
if that helps a little bit. So second mortgages, I would say, are probably just a little bit more popular than first mortgages. And the general range of return that you would get on a second mortgage is probably anywhere from 12 to 16%. So I want to share a deal that I did with you and some of the listeners. So basically, I was asked if I would be willing to lend $50,000 to a family who were in Mississauga. And so the timing was such that she was a teacher and she had her first child. So they're in their 30s. She had her first child in August before the school year started. And obviously, she's on maternity leave. She's not really making much from an income standpoint. And 2 months after the baby was born, so in early October, the husband lost his job. So between October and June, because I was introduced to them in June, they had racked up $40,000 of debt on their credit card at 25% interest rate.
Oh, that hurts.
Now, this stuff
Okay.
happens, right? Like,
Wow.
it
Okay.
totally happens. So that was their situation. So they had $40,000 of debt at 25% interest, but they had racked up their debt because they made sure that they didn't miss a single one of their first mortgage payments. So, having a kid's expensive, and so that was the situation they were in. So in June of that year, when I'd been introduced to them, he had just gotten a new job. So I'd seen his first pay stub. And I knew that in August, a couple months later, she would be going back to work. And so, maternity leave was ending and she was going to be going back to work. So I knew that they would both be in a situation where they would have their income coming back to them. And they also, at that point in time, had 1 year left on their 5-year mortgage term. And I knew they had a lot of equity. So if I lent them $50,000, that coupled with their first mortgage, there was a 78% loan to value. So that basically means it was 22% of the property of the fair market value they actually had in equity. So there's quite a bit of equity there. So I lent them $50,000 from my RSPs at 15% interest, and they actually paid the interest up front, which is actually not that uncommon with RSP mortgages, because essentially they wouldn't have to make a payment throughout the entire next year while they're kind of getting their finances back on track.
Okay.
So of the $50,000 that I gave them, $7,500 goes straight back into my RSP. And a year later, when they're both working, their mortgage is up for renewal, they collapse the first and second mortgage together and then pay me back the $50,000.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, in that scenario, I am in second position. So that would mean that if they were unable to pay their first mortgage, I would make payments on the first mortgage and step in and foreclose from the second position. So you essentially are a mortgage. So the same way with your bank, if you stop paying your mortgage, the bank is going to step in and take your property.
Right.
So it's the same kind of idea with this type of investing. But when you're doing all your proper due diligence up front, you know what can happen. You know what your options are with the property afterwards. So, for me, this one was in Mississauga, was appreciating at a significant rate. I knew I could rent it out, or I could renovate it, or I could sell it. But, I had a lot of peace of mind that I knew how they're going to be able to pay me back. I'm not in the business of taking houses away from people, but
Right.
it enabled me for that year to have that $50,000 grow at 15% interest.
Gotcha. Interesting. That is very interesting.
And so sometimes people say to me, oh, well, I'm nervous to be in second position. Like, how would I handle that? And so I'm like, okay, well, you can do first position mortgages. So, another example, I did a first position mortgage on a duplex just outside of Ottawa. And that one I lent just over $100,000. And the person who I was lending the money to, he was self-employed and a contractor. So that's why he was struggling to qualify for a mortgage. And his goal was to renovate this duplex and then sell it. But once I had given him the mortgage, it was just over 60% loan to value. So he had, put in some of his own money to buy it as well as to renovate the property. So I knew a ton of equity there, and it was a duplex that I would have been happy to acquire. Now, this gentleman made payments on a monthly basis, and the interest rate on that one was 11% return. So, to be in first position at 11%, is really not too shabby.
Right, right. And it's a mortgage too, right? So it's not like, I mean,
It's paper.
that's very interesting. So I guess so it sounds great. It's very interesting. I guess the only thing, I guess my only reluctance to maybe do something like that is it sounds like it's a lot of work to structure these deals together. Like if it's, that's like in, I guess the first example, was it only a year that basically the whole thing took place?
Each deal is about a year.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of work and due diligence to I guess I'm comparing
Yeah.
it to buying like an ETF, right? Where it's or a
I'm
stock
with you.
or something,
Okay.
right? So
Let
like
me explain a little bit about how kind of that process works.
Sure,
So
sure.
typically, I've got a network of mortgage brokers
Mm-hmm.
who will reach out to me and say, "Here is the deal in its entirety. Are you interested in it?" So I do it all, like each RSP deal like this that I do, I probably spend no more than 2 hours doing a bit of research on the area, what's fair market value, what's the rent. I'll go into like Google Street View to see what's there and what's in the area. I sign everything digitally on my computer. And so the diligence is actually it's very important, but it's definitely not time consuming.
Oh,
This is a
okay,
very
okay.
good thing. But I would say in order to be able to be in a position where I can make these decisions quickly and strategically, like I have to have a good real estate background. I have to be able to understand,
For
like
sure.
in worst case scenario, if I acquire this property, like is going to be something I can handle? Do I know people who can help me through the process if something were to go in an unexpected way?
Right. Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. No. Okay.
Mhm.
I guess. Yeah. That sounds a lot more reasonable. I guess when I'm thinking, like, I had this mental picture of you, meeting with them and researching the
No, no, no,
property
no.
and checking their credits. Like all like this whole.
All of that is done for me by the mortgage broker. So
Oh,
they'll
okay. Okay.
get the package that says, here's their credit. I get to see their credit scores. I get to see the appraisal of the property. I get to see any
Okay.
paperwork that I require. It's all kind of emailed to me. I review it all. And if it's a deal I want to proceed with, then like off to the races I go. And, the financial institution is fantastic in that they manage all of the payments every single month and they take care of all of those pieces. And I'm essentially registered on title as a mortgage, do what
Okay.
the banks are doing, right?
Right, right. Okay, no, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess I kept going back to when when we were looking for tenants for a rental and all the due diligence that I did to make sure we actually got good tenants, which was a lot. So I'm trying to think like, okay, so you I guess you had to do all that kind of work, where you're checking their employment history, their credit, all these details, talking to them, talking to their
Yeah.
employer, right? And then on top of that, it's a mortgage, so you're not only screening the person, you're also screening the property itself too. So I was like, oh my goodness, this sounds like hours and hours and hours and
No,
like
no,
days of work
not
basically.
at all.
But if the
And
bank's helping you with that, then
they
that's
take care of
okay.
everything.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Literally, I would say if I spend 2 hours on one of these, it's because I'm like being very, very diligent. And all of this happens at home in my fuzzy slippers.
Okay, okay, that's different. I was picturing like a week of just like playing detective basically.
No, no, not at all.
Because I'm like, think of
It's
rental
cool
screening
because
times two. That's what I had in my mind. But okay,
yeah,
that
then it allows, my investments to really start to grow at an exponential rate. And what I should mention is with the rates that I've mentioned to you, there are no sort of fees that are included in that. So, when you've got like a fund that you're invested in and it looks like you get 5% return, really after fees, it's like 3.5. This is in fact, when I say 15 or 11, that's exactly what ends up in my bank account. Any legal fees and anything associated with putting this together, the borrow pays for on top of that.
Oh, okay, okay, gotcha. Okay,
Mhm.
no, that's really interesting. I didn't. Yeah, there's something to think about.
Lots of options. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really. And just total side question. So you mentioned obviously you're doing a lot of research on the properties themselves, finding out what their actual value is, that kind of thing. How do you do comparative market analysis on your properties? Because I know in the US they have so many sites that you can like the information is so much more freely available, but I find in Canada it's so much more restrictive, right? Like the MLS has this gigantic monopoly and it's hard to find actual I mean, yeah, you can get listings, but to get actual sale data, like final price sold, how do you get those numbers?
That is such a good question. Okay, so there's a magical answer here. If you have a really good mortgage broker, they have access to a report that's called a Purview report. That's Purview. And a Purview report is almost like an automated version of that. It will pull the comparables sold, both the public listings as well as the private ones that realtors can't get from MLS.
Oh, okay.
It could show you how much equity is in the property, what's been registered on it, what's been the appreciation in the market, and it's all done in an automated way. So it's in most provinces in Canada, but it's a really, really great tool that you just let your mortgage broker know you're looking for the Purview report for a specific address. They can pull it for you like instantly.
So do they basically get access to all the info that an agent would have in the MLS too, like pictures of the property,
Yes.
all the specs, all of that? They have access to.
Yep. All of that would be. They may not have as many pictures,
Right.
but I don't know how much the pictures really
Okay.
are important. But yeah, it's got all of the specs, all of the details, and like even a lot more information that a realtor is going to get for you in comparables sold, because it'll also tell you, when was it bought, how much was the mortgage, things like that as well.
That's very interesting. I don't know about
Yeah.
that.
And your mortgage broker, I mean, especially if it's someone who's really good, they've got access. I mean, they get a subscription for the year. I don't know, maybe it's a few bucks for them to do a pull, but they do them for me all the time. And you just have to know to ask for it. And if you ask a mortgage broker and they're like, what's a Purview report?
Then get on your
Run.
mortgage broker.
Run.
That's
Send
the
me a
that's
note.
the
I'll
clue.
send you one who's like really good.
Sounds good. That's the thing. If they look at you like a deer in headlights, then you're like, oh, maybe I should shop around for a mortgage broker. Yeah. No. No. That's really interesting, and that makes total sense because I mean, they're obviously the mortgage brokers are obvious. Anybody dealing with the mortgage itself is going to want that due diligence to make sure that before they issue a loan that they know what the property is worth roughly. So obviously they need access to all those stats. That makes total sense. Oh, so smart.
Most people don't even know to ask for it. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, I didn't I mean, I've done so
For
much.
your next rental property, my friend.
Yeah, I've done so much reading and this never came up. And I think too, because a lot of this stuff is like US based, right? And it's like when you read about real estate type things. And so 'cause I'm guessing I'm guessing US has their own version of it, right? But I find that it's so much different there because they have companies where the data is just so much more readily available for everyone.
Well, that's a really good one to get a lot
yeah.
of cohesive
Yeah.
information about the property at just a couple clicks.
Very, very cool. No, thanks for sharing that. I was like, you're talking about comparables. I'm like, how did you get this data? Because I've been hungry for this data for so long, and
I'll hook you up.
Sounds good. Okay, no, that sounds good. So let's shift gears a bit. So we're talking about investing a lot, investing in real estate a lot. But let's talk about kind of the other side of real estate. If you're actually buying a home, not as an investment, but just for personal use. So if someone, let's say, is a first-time home buyer, how do they know if it's a good time to actually enter the real estate market? What kind of analysis should they be doing?
Okay, I love this question because I get it from first-time home buyers all the time. And the answer, in my opinion, is that if you're a first-time home buyer, you're not going to try to time the market. This is about your life. People always say to me, oh, I should have bought last year or 2 years ago or 4 years ago. That's kind of always what they say. And then they say, what's going to happen in the next 6 months? And the honest truth is you or I do not have a crystal ball. And, we don't know what's going to happen with the market. But, when it's time for you to buy your house because you are sick of renting, you're at the point where you've got enough of a down payment, your credit's in good shape, maybe you're getting married and you want to live with your life partner, that's really the time to buy a property that you are going to live in, for yourself. At the end of the day, markets have appreciated like crazy over the last few years. And we have people walking around saying like, oh, my property is worth all this much. I've got so much money. But the reality is the money is inside your property. There's not much you can do with it. And if you sell your property, you're going to need to spend it to buy your next one.
Right.
So, whether it's you spend or save an extra 5 or 10 or 20,000 when you buy your place, in the grand scheme of things, is not going to make a major difference. So I always tell first-time home buyers, don't be so worried about the market and focus more about, is it the right time for you to make this lifestyle shift?
Mm-hmm. And so I mean, what I find it's interesting, right, when it comes to that, because it's very different than if you're looking for investment real estate, I think, right? Like you're looking for a lot of different things because you're not actually going to be living in those properties. So you're looking at a lot more kind of the numbers, the mechanics. You're looking at it as an investment. so you could invest in a property that you necessarily wouldn't ever want to live in, but that's actually still a perfect property for somebody else that's, in a different situation, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
when it comes to first-time home buyers,
Hmm.
I wouldn't worry about the market. I would figure out, is it the right time for you to make this shift?
Hmm.
When it comes to investing, yeah, absolutely. You want to look at what's happening with the market. And especially you want to think about like, what strategy are you doing? Are you doing like fix and flips, like those great TV shows that we watch 30 minutes, where everything goes from disaster to like magnificent, right? You only want to do that if the market's going up,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah.
So if you're looking to buy and hold, whether it's a multi-unit or something like that, then the timing of the market may be better or more important. So like, for example, it's not even necessarily in the way that people may think, because if the market's going down, that may be a good time to buy something that's a multi-unit that you're going to hold for the long run. Also, when I think about real estate investing, I never suggest that people invest solely for the purpose of appreciation. If your property's not cash flowing for
Hmm.
you every single month, once you've taken in maintenance and vacancy, again, run. Like that's
Hmm.
not investing. That's hoping and praying.
Right, right, yeah. That's how a lot of a lot of people get into trouble because, oh, look how much these condos have been going up over year. Let's just get it, and
Yeah.
even though we're cash flow negative a few $100 every month, it'll be fine. And then
No.
and then you get a few dozen people like that, and things can get pretty nasty pretty quick. So yeah, for sure. So that's kind of for first time home buyers. What if you're not a first time home buyer? You're just looking to maybe move to a kind of a different kind of house. Would you say the same rules apply as a first-time home buyer, or is it a little bit different?
Yeah, I mean, if you're selling your property, if the market's up, you're going to sell your property for more, but it's going to cost you just as much to get into your next place. So,
Hmm.
when you're moving from one place to another, what's happening in the market is really not that important.
I guess the only exception I can think of top of my head would be if, let's say, you're in Toronto, let's say, and you want to move to, I don't know, some rural area, or like you're retiring, so you're like, oh, I'm gonna move to, I don't know, some far out part in Halifax, where or sorry, not Halifax, Nova Scotia or something, something like that, where the land is maybe just cheaper or something like that, and then you're selling from at a high, let's say in the Toronto market, and then going to an area where it's just a lot cheaper to buy the land. I guess then maybe it would make a difference.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, if you're looking to change markets, sorry, I was assuming that they were staying in the same
Yeah,
market because
yeah.
most people don't move to another city. But yeah, if you are
Most people just
retiring
move
or
from Toronto to Nova
downsizing,
Scotia. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, there you
Yeah.
go. Then it may make sense that you sell when the market's a little bit hotter so you can get more money. Again, like if you're looking to sell because you want to start renting, I mean, I don't know. I know some people who have done that, especially in the Toronto market in the last year. They had bought property, it had significantly appreciated. They're like, it's never going to be this hot again. They sold it and started renting in the downtown core. So,
Interesting. Hmm.
yeah, there are some definite nuances, but I'm assuming for the average person, the average family who's living in a city, they've got work, they've got school, and they're just looking to move to another property. If your property is worth more because the market's super hot, awesome, but it's going to cost you just as much to buy your next place. So,
Hmm.
you're not going to be able to really take advantage of that.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, one of the things I want to ask you about is we kind of been hearing in the news about how crazy the markets have been, and that there's even been cases where some buyers needed to walk away from properties that they've purchased. Can you explain what happened in those scenarios, and basically if you're a home buyer, how can you avoid this kind of problem?
Yeah, we've been hearing a lot of this in the news, unfortunately, and it makes my heart break every time I hear one of these scenarios. But essentially, what has been happening is when somebody has gone in and they've put in an offer, and they've either had no conditions or they've already removed their conditions, but the lender hasn't completed the appraisal. If the appraisal has come in lower than what they were in fact expecting, then the home buyer is responsible to make up the difference between what the value is that they put the offer in to pay at and the value that the lender is giving them the mortgage at. So
Interesting.
even if they're putting 20% down, they're now only getting an 80% mortgage of the appraised value, which is much lower. And so with the market rapidly decreasing just in purchase price. I mean, we're still up year over year, so like nobody should have a heart attack. But with prices significantly decreasing from what they were maybe a couple months ago, people who didn't do their proper due diligence, didn't get to a place where they finished their appraisal before they removed conditions. This is when they're like, oh shoot, I owe an extra 50,000 or 100,000 to try to close on this property that I wasn't expecting. I don't have that kind of money, and so people are trying to walk away. And so, there's been a lot in the news about kind of lawsuits and all of this that is in fact happening. But this is actually a really easy thing to avoid. And what people don't realize mostly is when you get your pre-approval from your mortgage broker or your financial institution up front, they have done their due diligence and they have approved you to get the mortgage. They haven't necessarily approved the property that you're buying. So just because you have an approval letter doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a financing condition. And people should never lift their financing condition until they have a firm commitment from the lender that the financing is a go. And in order for them to do that, in many instances, they need to do the appraisal. Mm-hmm. So while you may be approved, the property itself is not approved. And that's how we're finding ourselves in the situation that we've been hearing in the news.
Interesting. Because, like when you go to your bank, you could be pre-qualified or pre-approved by just saying, in both of those scenarios, it's just it's you, the person that are, like if you have pre-approval, you're approved, not necessarily the property. Interesting. So you don't actually remove okay. So that's why you're saying you always
don't
make sure you
remove the
put
financing condition,
and
until the lender has said,
they've signed off on
everything's good on the property side and your side, and you're good to go.
Gotcha.
And that's kind of the standard way to do it. And I think part of why we're seeing this issue is because we were in such a hot market for so long that people were thinking like, oh, I'm pre-approved. And we've never run into this issue because the value of properties has been going up and up and up. This is sort of the first time in a long time we're seeing that the value can actually go in the other direction.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Because, I remember, like when we bought our houses, to me, it was always, of course, I'm putting in a condition for financing and home inspection. It's like a no-brainer. I would never not do that. And then I remember I was, markets have obviously changed, and during kind of when everything was really hot and people were just overbidding and all this kind of stuff was happening, it was like, well, if you put a condition for no financing, or if you do put a condition for financing and home inspection, you're probably not going to get the property because there's like 3 people behind you willing to buy the property with no conditions. And which was just, like to me, that was just crazy. But it's like, if you want a house, some people were basically forced to do that. And so that I can see how that created, this kind of a problem where it became it's scary though, because I remember reading so much about it when I was first kind of getting into real estate investing, and it was always like, you always have a condition for financing inspection, like no exceptions. That was like one of the most recurring themes was you always have this. And then I'm hearing people not doing that because, and then they're I lost out on my dream property because I put those conditions in. So it's interesting how things change, right, as the markets get crazy. Who knew it would get this competitive, eh?
Yeah.
But okay, no, well, thanks for explaining that. No, that's really interesting, and I think a lot of people don't know that. So I think that's a really good a good tip that could save someone a ridiculous amount of money, because you'd basically lose your deposit, right? If you walked away from the property, if you got in that situation, you walked away, you'd lose it, right?
Well, not only would you lose the deposit, but you could be sued by the actual seller,
right?
For damages, for if it takes them a while to sell it, for the difference. They're very hard to follow up on, but nobody needs that kind of headache.
Stress,
right? So make sure you're putting in a financing condition, and even for people who are putting it in, like, do not lift that condition until you have 100% confirmation from your lender that they've done any and all of their due diligence, which can include an appraisal, to say that they are going to give you the mortgage of the size that you think you're going to get, so you don't have to come up with extra money to close.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, because the seller could say, well, we're keeping your deposit, but you basically tied up our property during the prime real estate selling season. Now it's like December. It's going to be much tougher to sell it. We're not going to be able to sell at a price anymore, so we're going to sue you for damages now. And now you're in this legal battle, and have
and it could include holding costs and legal fees and on and on and on. And what a nightmare! And all someone's trying to do is buy a house, right?
Yeah.
Very scary to buy your first house. I'll tell you that much.
Well, especially when you hear things like this, right? But like you said, that one kind of tip there can help you prevent that situation. So that's I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay, and awesome. So speaking of kind of mistakes and how to avoid them, what are some of the common mistakes that you see first-time home buyers make?
Yeah, so I mean, there's lots of mistakes, but I'll give you like a top three. The first one I would say is not leaving enough money for the closing costs.
Hmm.
So, people putting a lot of money into the down payment, but not realizing, how much the land transfer cost is, how much their legal fees are going to be, if there's adjustments on the property. So let's say that the seller prepaid their the property tax for the entire year, you may be responsible for paying them back. There could be quite a few adjustments, and the closing costs can be far more significant than somebody may expect. So making sure you've got some extra money as a bit of a buffer, and working with your mortgage broker up front to say, like, what are you anticipate the closing costs to be, as well as talking to your lawyer to get an estimation from their end, because they look at some of the different numbers and just make sure that there are no surprises when it comes to closing.
Yeah, no, that's a great tip. I remember just from my own personal experience, we were really happy that we had left a big buffer for that, because I remember like in the last house we moved into, we moved in, everything seems good, but then when we discovered that there was actually some electrical issues, and initially, when the home inspector said looked over it, he said, oh, yeah, it's like a couple $100 fix, no big deal. But then when we actually so we're like, okay, fine, we'll just fix this once we close on the property. And then the property closed, we actually had a professional electrician come in to fix it, and he basically said, oh, actually this is a bigger issue than you guys, than what your home inspector made it out to be. It's not going to be a couple $100. There's actually some pretty big issues here. It could actually start a fire. So it was something that the home inspector actually, it's not like he like totally overlooked the issue, because we found it thanks to him, but because he's not a professional electrician, he didn't know kind of all these caveats that actually it's actually going to be more expensive to fix than what you think. And so, I mean, thankfully, we made sure we had a huge buffer just in case things like that happen, especially because we were moving into an older house. But yeah, so I find that too, right? Like, yeah, there's the transfer cost, the lawyer, all of that, but also kind of any unsuspecting repairs, right? Like, what if your furnace breaks down a week after moving into the property and it's December, right? You're going to have to fork up quite a bit of money, right? So yeah,
just make sure you've got buffers is a big one.
Yeah, for sure.
The second mistake that I see people making all the time is the way they select their professionals, especially the realtor that they're going to work with. So most people select their realtor the same way they select a restaurant. Like, oh, I walked into an open house and this girl smiled at me, or like, I don't need to interview anybody. My sister's best friend or my uncle's business partner knows a realtor. This person is going to negotiate your single biggest purchase in your life. And, if you're not interviewing them up front to find out their personality, their negotiation style, what's the work they're going to do for you, it can cost you a lot of money. And, a lot of people feel like, oh, I don't need to know how to buy a home. My realtor is going to help me. But, not all realtors are created equal. Some of them can be incredible and, they can be your real estate guardian angel. But there's many, many out there who, won't necessarily behave in the way that you expect, or really serve you in the way that you deserve to be treated when they're helping you buy this big purchase.
Mm-hmm. That's a great tip for sure.
Mm-hmm. And then the last one. You got a question?
Oh, no, I was gonna say when we use an agent in the past, I had a whole page of just questions to drill them on before hiring them, because I remember doing that.
You're basically hiring them to do like a negotiation sales job for you, right? So could you imagine somebody or some corporation hiring you for sales jobs without interviewing you, without asking you your stats, without asking you, about your previous experience? Are you doing this full time? Whereas, we're quite comfortable just saying like, oh, she smiled at me at an open house, I think we're going to get along.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly.
So that's a big one.
Yeah.
The last big mistake that I see home buyers making is, we all know that houses are really expensive and qualify for a big mortgage is really tricky. So lots of first-time home buyers, especially millennials, have their family helping them out, whether it's with a financial gift or helping them qualify for a mortgage. And, what I see often is, if the millennial is getting a financial gift from their family and they haven't maxed out their RSPs, they don't think that they could take that gift and put it in their RSPs to get the tax benefit and then use the money. So your RSPs for the first-time home buyers plan has to be in there for 90 days before you take it out. But lots of people don't even think of, oh, I can put it in there to get the tax benefit first. as well as if your family is helping you qualify for the mortgage, it's really important to have a conversation with your lawyer about how you're going to be registered on title. So, if you don't have the conversation and it's, your name and your mom's name or your dad's name, the lawyer may just assume and put you on title 50-50. Whereas in reality, if they're not going to be living in the house, you'd be made way better off with a 99% being yours, a 1% being theirs, because when you sell the property in the future, it's your primary residence, so you don't have to pay capital gains, but your family is not living in your house, they're living in their own house. And so, if they're put on title 50-50, when you sell the property in the future, they are responsible for paying tax on the capital gains on half of that property.
Interesting. I don't know that part. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's a really good, like especially for, like you said, for first time home buyers, that's a huge one actually. Yeah. Especially, the housing prices being what they are. Yeah.
Totally. And so, if you just meet your lawyer for the first time, like right after you've got an accepted offer and you don't have a relationship with them where they know exactly what's happening, they may just say, oh, 2 people on the mortgage, no problem, 2 people on title. And it can be, a conversation that's completely sideswiped. Whereas if you know about this, to ask about it, you build your relationship with your lawyer up front, they can actually help you significantly in your purchase.
No, that's a great one. And I can see, some lawyers, they'll just do kind of by default, right? Like, oh, this many people, we split it evenly. They've done it so much now that that's probably just the default thing they go to, right? So you kind of need to raise that flag and say, oh, hold on.
Hold on there.
Hold on
This
there.
is what's happening.
Please change your templates or
Yeah.
So no, that's awesome. And then so thank you. Those are really valuable, and I think those were like some common ones that you just see posted everywhere. Those are actually some pretty unique ones that and I mean the difference they can make is obviously significant. So thanks for sharing those ones. And then let's talk about price a little bit here. So do you have any suggestions and then tips for basically to get a good price when you're trying to purchase a property?
Yeah, and actually, you kind of touched on this maybe in an inadvertent way, is that one of the things that I think is a great tip that most people should be doing is when you do a home inspection, make sure you get a home inspector who will actually generate quotes for you. So in your example, if you had your home inspector generate quotes and he had said, I'm not quite sure about the electricals, and you brought somebody else in and you were able to have a quote generated up front that said, hey, the electrical wiring needs to be redone. It's going to cost me $10,000. You go back to the seller and say, look, I have this hard, concrete, very recent, relevant data to say there's $10,000 of maintenance here. Can you either A, repair it yourself before you sell to me, B, reduce the purchase price, or C, I have the option of walking away. And most properties need some level of repair, and your inspector can say to you, oh, this repair is going to need to be done inside of the first year. Then you can go back to the seller and really use that in negotiation technique. Even if you've already got your offer accepted at a confirmed price, at that point in time, if you haven't lifted your conditions, you still have the opportunity to go back and say, before I lift the conditions, can you modify the price?
Yeah, whenever we bought a house, that was always or bought or sold a house, there was always that home inspection condition. And so I kind of got used to that always being part of the negotiating process. So it's like some people, they agree on a price and it's like, oh, celebration, we're going to own the house. And then I would always kind of like, I'm not excited yet because the home inspection's still coming. And that's basically, negotiation part 2 is.
Or it could be the breaking point. Like actually one of my first investment properties that I had a home inspection on, and I show up and like the inspector is up on the roof. He like swings down like Tarzan and he goes, Limor, you best not be buying this property. I was like, why? I was all excited that I had this great property. He was like, he brings me around to the back and he shows me this crack that I'm like, okay, what am I looking at? He's like, that's a $60,000 crack in the foundation. I recommend you walk away. I was like, okay, thank you. That was like the best thing that had ever happened to me. So, inspection is really, really critical.
For sure. Yeah, no, that I agree. And I think the tip you gave about to make sure you really screen your real estate agent, make sure you actually get a good one, interview them thoroughly. I think the same rule really applies to the home inspector too. I find you almost want someone that real estate agents don't like because they will find things in properties that prevent you from closing the home. Like I remember there was one that we found, and I remember the one person was telling me that they've used them and they said that if you ask real estate agents what they think of this person, they'll say they don't like him, and it's because he's so thorough and you'll find so many things that he might actually like break the deal. And so I'm
But
kind of like, that's who you want on your team,
exactly
though. That's exactly who you need.
that's exactly who
Yeah.
you need. And
Yeah.
also important to note that like the realtor wants to close the deal because they also want to get paid, right? So I'm not
Right.
saying that they're all evil or they want you to buy terrible properties, but your realtor gets paid a percentage of what your price is. So the higher your price, the higher their commission is, and they want to close the deal and move on to their next client. So
Right.
you really are the only one who is looking out for your very best interest in all aspects of buying your property.
That's true. And that still bugs
Let's be honest
me.
here.
Yeah, I know. And that still bugs me about kind of the real estate industry and how it works. It's like, so you're an agent, you're supposed to represent me and have my best interest at heart and all of that. And you sign all this paperwork saying, oh yeah, I've got, they've got your back and they're going to look out for
Yeah.
you and all this stuff. And, but at the end of the day, if you pay more for the property, they get paid more. And so it's kind of like, yeah, the paper says one thing, but they have a monetary incentive to do the complete opposite. And I don't know, that just bugs me so much. It's like, it's really frustrating because it's the opposite. Like anything, it's like when, in the investment industry too, right? It's like when you're looking for, okay, what should I invest in? And then you go ask a person what you should buy, and then they recommend something because they're getting, like a commission on the back end, right? So there's a conflict of interest. And then obviously so everything they say is now suspect. It's like the same things applying to the real estate profession. So I don't know, that drives me bananas. Sorry, I'm venting here.
No, totally fair. And it's actually, I think, the reason why, particularly in the last 6 months when the market started turning, I have gotten so many phone calls and emails from first-time home buyers just saying like, okay, can you help me? Can you give me advice? Because nobody in the process is giving me unbiased information.
Right, exactly.
My realtor, my mortgage broker, my lawyer, they all make money even if I make a mistake, even if I buy the wrong property. So
exactly, yeah.
Really looking for unbiased advice.
It's basically buyer beware, to the extreme. No, I know what you mean. And this isn't like to knock real estate agents. I mean, there's some amazing real estate agents. It's more so just the way that the business and the systems and the compensation structure, the way it's set up. Yeah, I know. It's just, it shouldn't be like that, right? It's kind of like if you hire a lawyer, right? You're paying them good money to have your best interest at heart, and they're supposed to look out for you, and they've got your back. And that's the way it should be, right? It shouldn't be that, you pay if your lawyer makes you less money because you overpaid for the house, they get more money. I mean, it shouldn't be like that. So
with lawyers, I actually recommend that you use a lawyer that's a flat fee. There are lawyers out there that will do real estate as flat fee, and then you can ask them as many questions as you want without thinking like, gosh, every time I send them an email or I call them, it's costing me $300 for the question.
Right. Yeah, I've always done the flat fee thing, and I also always did the lawyer, because a lot of times, the real estate agent would, they have lawyers that they can recommend to you, that they usually have like a go-to lawyer that they will recommend to you to make things, quote unquote easier. And once again, that maybe everything's all good and above board, but it automatically just creates a conflict of interest, right? Because if they're buddies, right, and they help each other out, that kind of a thing. So now now the lawyer, well, if the lawyer says no, you shouldn't, there's an issue with this deal, bringing up all these issues, well, that could strain the relationship with their realtor buddy, right? So I'm not saying this happens all the time or anything, but once again, it always kind of, I kind of want them completely separate, right? The lawyer is totally separate, has nothing to do with my real estate agent. They're totally, they work for me, right? They don't work for me, but really they're buddies with the realtor as well, who just really, really wants to close the deal. I don't know. That's kind of that's one of the things that I.
That's your rant for today.
That's my rant. I know. I'm so paranoid in that industry just because there's all these financial incentives for people to make me pay as much as humanly possible. And anyways. All right, but I will stop ranting because this is supposed to be me interviewing you, but you're hitting on these sensitive spots, and I can't help myself. And I feel that you're in the real estate thing, so you can relate, and so I'm like, Limor's got a listening ear. Let me vent, please. All right, but no, let's enough Cornell talking. Thank you for letting me vent. Okay, so that's good. So does that cover that kind of the question good
Yeah.
enough, you think, but in terms of the tips
Yeah.
for first-time home buyers? Okay, sounds good. And then so let's talk about your course a bit, because you created a course for first-time home buyers. And what made you decide to create this course?
Yeah, so I mean, as I just mentioned before this summer, when kind of spring, when the GTA market started turning, first time home buyers started seeing, okay, it's a buyer's market for the first time. The prices are going down just a little bit. And I started getting an absolutely massive influx of phone calls and emails and questions asking about how do I choose a realtor? What does the realtor do? How do I work with them? How does the offer work? How did the mortgage work? What do I do with the property taxes? Do I actually need a lawyer? I had one girl say to me, can't my boyfriend just go to the registry office? And
Right.
it really made me realize that there is no comprehensive um, way for a first time home buyer to get the unbiased, the good, the bad, and the ugly
Hmm.
on how to buy your first house. Everything soup to nuts. So really, I was excited about the opportunity to put something together because I've got nothing to gain from which property you buy or don't buy. But I think that people should be informed on the process and know their options and be educated and empowered because this is a massive, massive purchase and it's really exciting, but it is stressful and scary.
Hmm. For sure. No, that's awesome. Yeah, the just having a one-stop shop to kind of know everything you need to know instead of I mean, it's already a very time-consuming and stressful process. So the last thing you want to do is try to be hunting around from different sources, trying to piece together information to figure out how to do all of it, because you're going to be busy enough just with the whole thing anyway. And I guess this way too, you can really prepare yourself and just save yourself some time. That's awesome. Now, can people ask you questions as well when they sign up for your course in case there's something that comes up
Yep. So
that's not
it's
in there?
a 6-week online course where I
Hmm.
basically explain everything in the process, start to finish. They get worksheets and downloadables and checklists, and every element of the process they're informed about. They understand, and as part of the course, every single week for the 6 weeks, there's a live Q&A. Where on that particular topic and subject matter, we all jump on into like an online forum where we're all looking at each other live and folks can ask questions about how in fact this applies to them and any elements of clarification they're
Hmm.
required. But basically, it empowers folks to understand everything from types of properties, what's the difference between a condo and a single family home, what's a buyer's market, what's a seller's market. And I've really catered it to anywhere across Canada where I talk about provincial nuances and a variety of elements. I really just want people to know the process from start to finish. That's really what I was hearing. Is they're like, from talking to first time home buyers as part of designing this course, I interviewed over 50 millennials just to see like what are they struggling with. And what I kept hearing is like, I'm surprised and caught off guard every step of the way. And it's really, really stressful. So I make sure that I've outlined every single element. And, they do have the opportunity on a weekly basis to have a discussion in a group setting with me where they can ask questions for clarification.
That's awesome. I like how you have the community thing, especially around this particular subject, because it's not like the information never changes either. Like there are some
Yeah.
things there are some fundamental things that don't change, but things come up too, right? Like the government changes the mortgage rules, for example,
Yep.
things of that nature, right? And just the landscape is continuously evolving, just with regulations a lot of times, and just other things as well, right? Like whether it's buyer's market, seller's market, that kind of a thing, and different kind of techniques people start using, things of that nature. So it's really nice how you have not just a static course, but also sort of that live community component. So when these new things come up, you're kind of, I guess it's safe to say, kind of if you're part of this, then you're up
Absolutely.
to date on the latest things so that you're not caught off guard by something new, like some new strategies or some new laws or regulations that came into play.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
even within like the static courses, the static components, like I'll be continually making updates. If there's a massive
Awesome.
change, a
Awesome.
regulation change, I want people to really have all the tools that they need and be ready and comfortable to buy their first house.
That's fantastic. Yeah, because there's a lot of good books out there on this kind of subject, but it's like, okay, the book it's a great book, but it was published in 1990, and it's specifically and it's like and it's U.S. based or whatever, or
Yeah,
or even if it's Canadian based, it's like from 1990. So some things are still the same, but some things have changed, and so it's I think this is one of those things where you actually need to know kind of the latest things so that you're
for sure. And
because like you said, it's your biggest investment, right? Pretty much. So you
totally.
you
And
don't want to mess
and
it up.
For me, I mean, I'm continually investing in the market. I've got, like in the real estate market, I've got investments in multiple provinces across Canada. I'm also a young gal, so, I'm not talking to folks with a whole lot of jargon. It's kind of like on my YouTube channel every week. The channel is called Limor, Limor. I post a video every week and I talk about money in plain English. So this is about how to buy your house in plain English from, a fellow young millennial who's making it easy and accessible.
That's awesome. And then it's neat how you actually interviewed the 50 millennials on their home buying journey, right? Just to see kind of the common themes, the quite common questions, common concerns. And I'm assuming you took that info then and then created your course kind of around that to make sure that you covered all those kind of main concerns. So what are some of the themes that came up when you did your interviews? What are some of the common sort of, fears or misconceptions or questions that people have kind of that you realized after interviewing all these people?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first question I asked everybody is on a scale of 1 to 10, what was their confidence level in buying a house so that they'd know what to do, when they started their journey. And 1 is like you have zero idea, and 10 is like you could teach a course. And the answers basically ranged between 3 and 5 across the board. People were very stressed out. They didn't know what to expect. They felt like the more research they did, the more conflicting information they got.
Right.
Lots of people were like, oh, my realtor is going to teach me. And then in their next breath, they're like, yes, but they make more money off a worse negotiation where I actually pay more. Exactly what you were saying before.
Exactly. Yeah.
While they had this sort of hope in the realtor, they were still really nervous. A lot of people said they were relying on their family to help them, but recognized that their parents bought real estate in a very different market. Lots of concerns around, like, if I take my entire life saving and put in a down payment, how do I ensure that I have enough money to manage the property, to have an emergency fund in case something happens? Just a lot of worry and concern, and it's this massive emotional, stressful roller coaster that, they're not really sure how they're going to get through. But, once they jump on, it's just a crazy ride until they end up on the other side. And hopefully, there's a lot of hoping that they buy the right place.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And yeah, one thing that I like about this too is that you're also a real estate investor. And I found just from my research kind of over the years is that even when I was buying my homes for personal use, just, primary residence, I remember trying to read kind of the best practices from real estate investors, because I find these are the guys that, or gals that do this for a living. So they know kind of the right way to do things. So it's really great how I find have that background, because like real estate is your life basically, right? And not just primary residence, but investing as well, where kind of the stakes are even, are higher usually, because it's usually higher dollar amounts too, right? Especially if you're dealing with like multi-unit. So I really think that's great how you've got that kind of well-rounded approach, and you can take hints and tips from both worlds and apply them to this kind of process. So kind of speaking of that, what are some of the tips you have for first-time home buyers that investors do that home buyers usually don't do?
Yeah. So there's one really big one that comes to mind for me. And that is actually when you put in your deposit. So in all provinces, except for British Columbia, you actually give your deposit right up front when the offer is accepted. And generally, what your realtor will advise you to do is to give as large of a deposit as you possibly can to show the seller how serious you are. But then the deposit is typically then given to the seller's realtor to hold. And this can be quite challenging. And in fact, I had one gentleman, a young guy in Toronto, who I helped him buy a house, his first place, privately, because he'd had a massive disaster with this. So, when he was buying, he was looking for a place where he wanted to have a lot of light and he wanted to have a lot of quiet, because he was living in a basement apartment for a very long time and didn't have either of those. And so when he found the place that he thought he really liked, was asking the seller's realtor about it. There was a construction site next door where basically the realtor had said they were building like a low rise, or I think it was like a low rise strip mall. But when he put his deposit, he put in $25,000. Which is a pretty hefty deposit, and it was given to the seller's realtor to hold. And then he had 1 day to lift conditions. So during that time, he got the status certificate of the condo board and had seen that there was, in fact, a small lawsuit about somebody who had slipped. And, he was trying to find out about that. And so one of the things that he did in trying to find out what was happening with that, and it turns out it was almost closed it, finished off. But he reached out to his city councilor and said, like, hey, have you heard about this? What's going on? The city councilor was able to tell him what was happening. But he also said, oh, and by the way, I heard about the low rise being built next door. And the city councilor came back and said, like, oh, that's not a low rise. That's going to be like a massive skyscraper, a condo building. So it was right next door. It would have been crazy noise for years to come during the building, and it would have blocked all of his lights. So he was pretty disappointed because it was not what he wanted. And obviously, I mean, I'm not saying that the realtor was lying. They may not have known. But then he came back to his realtor and said, listen, I got one day to remove this condition. I really don't want to proceed. Like, this is really making me unhappy. And his realtor pushed him, why? He told his realtor the actual story. Now, in his conditions, he should have been able, the conditions were worded in such a way that it's at the buyer's discretion, and he should have been able to pull out no problem. But his realtor, not that savvy, despite the fact that she's got fancy newsletters and has won lots of awards in the industry. But anyways, reached out to the seller's realtor and said, hey, we want to pull out. Ended up telling the seller's realtor why, and because it wasn't part of the condition, the seller decided they didn't want to give him back his deposit. So he's freaking out. He ended up hiring a lawyer to help him get the deposit back. His legal bill was $1,300, and he only got back $20,000 of the $25,000. So it ended up costing him $6,300 because the deposit was held in the realtor's bank account. Whereas what I do as an investor and what is very common in the investor community is when I put a deposit, I always have my lawyer hold it for me in trust. That way, if I pull out, I get it back right away, no questions asked, and you don't go through this whole rigmarole, which in this instance cost this guy $6,300 for a condo he didn't buy.
Wow, that's pretty intense. I feel
right?
for the guy.
So,
Wow.
yeah. So, I mean, that's exactly what I was alluding to before, that, in the course, I'm not only conveying things that folks may not know, but I'm also teaching tricks of the trade that investors do on a regular basis that first-time home buyers absolutely should.
For sure. And I find there's so many of those, like, because if you read like kind of, the blogs or some of these guides out, like these free guides out there, they kind of have this sort of generic help out there, which is great. Like, some of it's good, but you don't get sort of the much more kind of the tips that come from actual really savvy investors that you can apply to your own situation when you're buying your own home, even though it's not like even though it's for your own primary residence. No, I find there's a lot of things that overlap that just kind of people just don't know about because it's not as common, and only kind of people that are in the game basically know about them. So no, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, let's talk a bit more about the course. So who is it for ideally?
Yeah, so it's for ideally first-time home buyers. Obviously, if you're buying like a second home, there's definitely a lot of nuances. But I talk about the first-time home buyer plan and lots of elements, about buying a house. I would say if somebody is looking to buy a house inside of the next year and a half, it's a great time to take the course. You want to understand everything soup to nuts before you get started and before you are in the process of, working with realtors and lawyers. I've got interview guides for every single person on your real estate team to make sure that you're asking the right questions to choose the right process or to choose the right person who can guide you through the process. So anybody in Canada who is a first-time home buyer, like I said, I've got lots of provincial nuances included in there from all of the investments that I do across Canada. But really, if you're looking to buy a house, you're overwhelmed, you're stressed, let me just give you all of the answers and let me help you.
I wish your course was around when I started because I remember spending just an insane amount of time. Like I'm a really thorough guy. Like I research things a lot, kind of maybe excessively at times. And so I just remember spending just insane amounts of time just trying to take all the pieces together, learn how to actually do it, and then also just filtering out the crap from actual good advice. Because like you said, right? I mean, you could get some, like you mentioned, that one person, well, oh, my real estate agent is going to teach me everything, but then there might be that conflict of interest there as well, right? So you kind of have to piece things together. Like, okay, this is this advice, but is it biased? Is it unbiased? Is there risk that is biased? Like there's all these. It's this extra stress and work you have to do to try to piece it all together. So I'm really happy that you not only put it all together one course, so it just saves an insane amount of time, but also kind of how you applied your kind of best practices from your investing experience to this, so you get things that you pretty much can't get anywhere else. So no, that's awesome, and I like how it's up to date too, right? Because I mentioned that with the regulations changing, it's
Sure.
nice to know you're fully informed instead of constantly trying to look for kind of the latest news and did this change, did they tighten the mortgage rules again, or what's happening with the interest rates and all these kinds of things you'd have to do. Constantly be chasing the newest data, whereas in your thing, it's like a one-stop shop, it sounds like. So that's fantastic.
There you go.
Very cool. Awesome. So where can people find more about you and your course?
Yeah. So the course actually divulging all of these secrets is called Home Purchasing Secrets, and they can find all the information that they need about it on homepurchasingsecrets.com. I've actually even got a sneak peek where you can get a little bit of an insight on the course itself and a little bit of a demo to see if this is in fact the right thing for you. So homepurchasingsecrets.com, and if they're looking to just find out more about me in general, with a name like Limor, I'm very easy to find on the internet. I have a YouTube channel called Limor, Limor, and I publish articles very regularly on limor.money. I'm also on every social media you could possibly find out there. So very easy to get in touch with me.
That's awesome. No, this was a lot of fun, Limor. Thanks. And I'll make sure to put everything in the show notes too. I look forward to talking with you in the future as well.
Great. Thank you for having me.
All right. Awesome. Thanks. Bye. All right, I hope you enjoyed the episode with Limor. You can check out one of her free webinars and ask her your home buying questions over at buildwealthcanada.ca/real estate webinar, all one word. And if you're going to be looking into buying your first home within the next year, then I definitely recommend checking out her in-depth step-by-step home buying course made specifically for Canadians, where you can have her in your corner during your home buying process. And you can learn more about that by going to buildwealthcanada.ca/real estate. Of course, I'd like to give a big thank you to Paytm for sponsoring the show. Don't forget to try out Paytm on your phone or tablet for free and use the promo code BUILDWEALTH, all lowercase one word, when paying your first bill to get a free $10 cash back on that bill. And in addition to that, you can get up to 3% cash back on bills that you pay with the app, as opposed to the 0% that you're currently getting at your bank. And you can finally get cash back rewards on all those utility bills, property tax bills, and tuition payments, and others that don't typically accept credit cards. Now, as a Build Wealth Canada listener, you'll get that $10 for free. Just go to paytm.ca on your phone or tablet, download the app, and use the promo code BUILDWEALTH, all lowercase, all one word, when making your first bill payment to get that $10 cash back. All right, so that's all for today. A big thank you to our sponsor, paytm.ca. Have a wonderful week, and talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Build Wealth Canada podcast at www.buildwealthcanada.ca.